Tonight, I'm going to tell you the story of the Devil's Embrace, a tale whispered in fear about what happens when the darkness reaches out its hand and never lets go. Turn off the lights, settle in, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep. Johnson sat in his chair, eyes fixed on the television, glancing down at his wristwatch every few minutes. It was nearly 11, and David still hadn't come home. His son was never out this late. David was a good man, successful in his career at a large corporation. At 27, he had no wife, nor any intention of marrying yet. He claimed he was still too young. He had been working for 5 years now, but refused to move out, still clinging to the comfort of his father's house after his mother's death. Every evening, David would take a walk around 7 and be back by 9. Tonight was the first time he had broken that pattern. Johnson had already called him twice. Each time, the line rang only briefly before cutting off. Just as Johnson was about to put on his coat and search for his son, the front door latch rattled. Relief washed over him. David was home. The young man stepped inside, drenched to the bone. His eyes were strange, dull, empty. Without a word, he walked straight past his father and into his room. No greeting, no small talk, something he always did after his evening walks. Puzzled, Johnson rose to close the door his son had left ajar. As his hand touched the wooden handle, he jerked back. It was slick, coated with something foul-smelling. A fishy stench filled his nose. Looking down, he saw black slime clinging thickly to his palm. Disgusted, he shouted toward his son's room. "Where the hell have you been? Coming home late, not answering your phone? Do you think that's how a son treats his father?" No reply. The silence felt heavier than any scolding could. Johnson frowned, but eventually returned to his bedroom. Lying in the dark, he found himself thinking of Margaret. When she was alive, David had been inseparable from his mother, always cheerful, always talkative. Since her death, the boy had grown quieter, gloomier. But tonight was different. Tonight, he had been utterly mute. As sleep began to take him, a sound stirred Johnson awake. From David's room came whispers. Not one voice, but many, low, muttering, irritated. The hair on the back of his neck bristled. Why did it sound like a crowd in there? The clock read midnight. The voices grew louder, denser. Johnson squeezed his eyes shut, desperate for sleep, but the whispers wouldn't let him. Johnson tossed and turned, the restless muttering from the next room needling his ears like static. Finally, he lost his patience. "David," he shouted into the dark. "It's midnight. What are you mumbling about, listening to the radio, talking to your girlfriend? Do you plan on letting your father sleep or not?" No reply came, but the whispering stopped. Silence pressed in, thick and eerie, broken only by the faint whine of a mosquito drifting past his ear. Johnson lay back down, pulled the blanket over himself, and at last sank into a deep and dreamless sleep. At dawn, he rose early, determined to make breakfast for himself and his son. David usually slept late. Sometimes he ate at home, sometimes elsewhere. But by 6 o'clock, after washing his face and stepping outside for some fresh air, Johnson stopped short. David was already there. He sat in the yard, motionless in a chair, eyes glassy, lips moving soundlessly as though whispering to someone unseen. At his feet stretched a long brown streak, cracked and dry. Blood. Johnson's chest tightened. His son sat upright, clutching something close to his chest, his fingers clenched so tightly they whitened. The father squinted, trying to see. David was still in the same filthy clothes from the night before, streaked with black stains. Scowling, Johnson marched forward. "Where the hell did you crawl last night to end up like this? Why don't you wash up and change before work?" David didn't respond. He just hunched over, shielding whatever he held, and then Johnson saw it. Blood dripping, pattering against his son's trousers. His heart lurched. "My God, David, what happened to you?" Terrified, he rushed forward and tore his son's arms apart. Not a wound, not what he had feared. It was an animal, a limp, broken animal, a black cat. Its neck was bent backward at an impossible angle, its eyes bulging, its mouth leaking fresh red that ran down David's legs. Johnson staggered back, bile rising in his throat. Suddenly, David spoke. His voice was hurried, defensive, almost childlike. "I'm fine, Dad. I was trying to sleep, but the black cat was screaming too loud. I got angry, went outside, caught it, and broke its neck. It's always running on our roof at night. I couldn't take it anymore, so I killed it." Johnson froze. His son had always adored animals. He used to feed strays in the alley, and yet here he sat, strangling a cat with his bare hands. It didn't make sense. And still, David's explanation wasn't entirely wrong. Johnson, too, had been tormented by the cat's nightly cries, the screeching, the claws raking across the roof, the hellish wails. He'd even considered poisoning it once. But the cat was clever. Johnson had tried to catch it more than once, and each time it slipped away like smoke. Strays were vicious, resilient, even half-starved. They fought like demons. To catch one barehanded was nearly impossible. To kill it without so much as a scratch, unthinkable. Yet David had done it. Clean. Effortless. Johnson's frown deepened. Something wasn't right. He thought back to the night before. He hadn't heard the cat at all. Normally its shrieks woke him easily, yet somehow, last night, it hadn't stirred him. How then had it woken David, the boy who could sleep through storms? The thought gnawed at him, but he pushed it aside. It was just a cat, he told himself. Just a cat. Then at least change your clothes, Johnson muttered. Wash up before work. David gave a faint smile. Last night, during my walk, I slipped into a sewer. Came home stinking, meant to shower, but I was too exhausted. Couldn't even say a word. Just collapsed into bed and slept like death until the cat woke me. Johnson stared at him, unsettled, his mouth dry. Under his breath, he repeated his son's words, as though testing them for truth. Asleep like death. But Johnson couldn't shake the memory of last night. He had heard something. Low murmurs, whispers slipping from David's room in the dead of night. If David hadn't made those sounds, then who had? Or worse, what had? He kept the suspicion to himself. His son was grown now. There were things a man chose not to share with his father anymore. It wasn't like when David was a child, blurting out every thought in secret. Johnson waved a hand, forcing a smile. Enough. Go wash up, change clothes, and come eat. I'll get breakfast ready. David gave a silent nod and turned back into the house. The black cat's corpse slipped from his lap, tumbling to the ground. Its twisted neck and bulging eyes faced the house, facing David's retreating figure, as if watching him even in death. Those eyes, though glassy, still burned with a strange, poisonous hatred. Johnson waited until David disappeared from sight, then stooped to lift the body. He frowned, studying it, muttering two strange, inaudible words under his breath. Then he dug into the soft earth of the yard and buried the carcass. By the time David returned, showered and dressed, breakfast was waiting. He devoured the noodles greedily, then rose from the table. Johnson looked him over with surprise. From head to toe, David was clothed in black. Black coat, black shirt, black trousers, black shoes, even black socks. Only his tie was white, like a stark stripe of bone. He looked dressed for a funeral. Normally, David favored bright, lively colors. This dark ensemble was nothing like him. Yet he seemed delighted with it, as though the clothing itself pleased him, filled him with secret joy. His face carried the look of a man who had just achieved something, and who was already eager for what came next. The strangeness mounted. Since last night, everything about David had shifted. Still, Johnson said nothing. He smiled faintly and watched his son leave for work, sliding behind the wheel of the family's black car. Out of 4 vehicles, David almost always chose the white or the silver, never the black. That one, until today, had practically been Johnson's alone. Why today? Had David's taste changed entirely? That evening, Johnson prepared dinner as always, the evening news murmuring from the television. At exactly 7:30, the low rumble of an engine outside. David staggered through the door, his shirt torn wide open, his clothes smeared with a long brown streak. Blood, Johnson realized with a jolt. Had David killed another animal? But what creature could shred a man's shirt like that? David said nothing. He slouched past, ignoring his father's calls to eat, and shut himself in his room. Johnson left a plate for him on the table, then ate quickly alone, sealing the doors afterward. He settled back into his nightly ritual, television until 10 o'clock sharp. But as the program played, another sound threaded beneath it. A murmur, low, constant, like the hiss of many voices speaking at once. Not from the TV, from David's room. The same whispers as last night. It was unbearable. The susurrus gnawed at his nerves, worse than shouting. For a man as sensitive to sound as Johnson, it was torture. He snapped. David, if you're gonna talk, talk loud. Stop with the whispering. You're driving me insane. But the noise only swelled, rising in waves as though a whole crowd was arguing behind that door. Johnson slammed the remote onto the couch and stormed toward his son's room. Just as he raised his fist to knock, a thunderous crash echoed above. From the rooftop, the corrugated metal shook and boomed as though something massive hammered at it, threatening to rip it open. Heart pounding, Johnson spun, racing up the stairs. He snatched a broom, ready to beat whatever wild creature plagued the roof. The pounding grew faster, harder. Then came the screams, high, shrill, cat-like screams that split the night. Johnson's legs trembled. He cursed under his breath, steadied his grip on the broom, and burst onto the rooftop. "Get out of here," he roared, slamming the handle against the metal. But a thought struck him, cold as ice. Didn't the black cat die this morning? Then whose cries are these? Another stray, or the same one? He pounded furiously until at last the noises ceased. Only the soft wind moved across the rooftop. Johnson exhaled shakily, shut the door behind him, and descended the stairs. But unease lingered. His mind tugged back to the place in the yard where he had buried the cat. A sudden dread seized him. He bolted outside, stumbling to the mound of earth. His breath caught in his throat. The grave was torn open. A neat, dark hole yawned where the body had been, blood smeared across the soil and trailing toward the old tree beside the house. The cat had crawled out, broken neck, bulging eyes, bleeding, but not dead, alive, or worse. Johnson's skin went clammy. The only explanation that fit was one that made his stomach twist: revenge. He staggered back inside, slammed the door, and pressed his body against it, panting. His heart thundered. Then he froze. There, on the sofa, the cat. It sat upright, its body facing the television, but its head twisted backward, staring directly at him with those hateful, glaring eyes. Johnson let out a strangled cry and collapsed. The cat shrieked, leaping out through the open window. When he came to, the television still played, but beneath it, the whispers remained. Drifting, muttering, rising from David's room. Johnson staggered to his feet, trembling, before sinking back onto the sofa to steady himself. The more he thought about it, the less he could comprehend how that cat had survived, with its neck twisted completely backward, a grotesque 180 degrees. Its eyes glowed in the dark, not the pale green shimmer of ordinary cats, but a hellish, blood-red fire. From David's room came the muffled murmur again, that strange muttering that seemed to grow more unbearable by the moment. Johnson shot upright. For the first time, he forgot the courtesy he always extended toward David, that small ritual of knocking before entering his son's room. He eased the door open just a crack and peered inside. David sat hunched on the corner of the bed, gnawing at something, his back turned. The stench was overpowering, foul beyond belief. And still, the muttering went on, directed towards something stretched out before him. Johnson squinted and his heart jolted. It looked like a hide, a sheet of flesh, vast, leathery, tattooed with strange entangled markings that writhed in the lamplight. Blood spurted in thin, steady arcs from whatever David was doing. He mumbled back to the hide as though answering it, his voice mingling with high-pitched squeals that seemed to come from somewhere inside him. Suddenly, with a jerk, he flung something from his lap. A rat. A sewer rat the size of a cat. Its body was hollow, its innards torn away, the blood sucked dry. Johnson froze. The wet, crunching sound that followed left no doubt. David was gnawing at the carcass, savoring it. His teeth cracked through brittle bone. Johnson's mouth fell open in silent horror. Nausea churned in his gut, but he forced it down. Still facing the wall, David burst out in shrill, manic laughter, then bent forward again, biting down savagely. A stream of blood sprayed across the wall. Another rat squealed in agony, though none could be seen. Johnson stumbled backward, barely able to believe his own eyes. He eased the door shut without a sound and collapsed into a chair, wiping the sweat that poured down his brow. A devout Catholic, Johnson had always believed in Scripture, that demons were real, that possession was possible. But belief had always been an abstract thing, distant, never encountered face to face. Until now, until it touched his son. With shaking hands, he lay down in bed and clutched the crucifix to his chest, listening to the whispers seeping from the next room. He resolved that in the morning, something must be done. At dawn, Johnson rose and prepared breakfast as if nothing had happened. His face was calm, betraying no fear. David, too, seemed the very picture of composure. He entered dressed immaculately in black, radiating refinement and even a cloying sweetness, as though bathed in perfume. He ate with polite manners, speaking as he always had. But the civility only deepened Johnson's dread. He no longer recognized the boy he had raised. This was no longer his innocent son. It was something else, something cunning, dangerous. David finished breakfast, smiled, and left for work. Johnson quietly cleaned the dishes, then wandered the garden. His eyes drifted to the roses. They seemed taller than yesterday, impossibly so, sprouting upward more than 20 centimeters overnight. The unnatural growth unsettled him, but he pressed on toward the mound of earth where he had buried the cat. The hole was still there, black and yawning, proof that what he'd witnessed was no dream. He filled it in with steady hands, then entered the garage, selected a car, and drove off. His destination, the church, the largest in the parish, home to the most trusted priests of the region. Inside, Father Thomas Miller greeted him warmly. The priest's reputation for eloquence and devotion was unmatched. Seeing Johnson's stricken face, he asked gently, "What troubles you, my son? You look unwell." Johnson sank onto a wooden pew, his voice breaking. "Lord have mercy, Father. I believe I have seen the devil himself." The priest stiffened but recovered quickly. "The devil where?" Johnson swallowed. "Forgive me, Father. To explain, I must tell you everything." And he did. The cat, the rats, the muttering in the night, the transformation in David. He described his son's gruesome feast in the inhuman voice that seemed to answer the hide of flesh. Father Miller listened in silence, his eyes deep with thought. At last, Johnson knelt before him, hands clasped, pleading, "Father, please, help us, cast the demon out of my boy, but do it quietly. He has no faith, and if he learns I have come to you, he will destroy us all. This must remain secret. I fear for my life and for his soul." Johnson crossed himself, bowed deeply, whispered a firm "Amen," and departed. Father Miller said nothing, but his silence did not mean inaction. That very night he gathered his fellow priests and the most devout parishioners. Armed with crucifixes, holy water, and scripture, they crept toward Johnson's house. At midnight, the witching hour, the house came alive. From David's room rattled guttural growls, mingled with mad mutterings. A sickly glow seeped through the cracks. One priest whispered, "Father Miller, this is no ordinary evil. Surely it is as Johnson said." Miller nodded grimly. "It is a demon. Bind him quickly, with ropes soaked in holy water. Bring him to the church. We must act with silence. Johnson has entrusted us with secrecy, and we owe him that." The others agreed. 2 young men slipped into the house. The doors were already unlatched, as though Johnson himself had prepared the way. They burst into David's room. He was crouched, gnawing another rat, his back slick with blood. Before he could react, the ropes were upon him, sizzling against his skin as the holy water burned. He writhed, howling, his eyes black as coal, his mouth spewing words in some foreign guttural tongue, Latin, perhaps. They blindfolded him and dragged him away, shutting the door behind them as though nothing had happened. Outside, before the churchmen, David was forced to his knees. Father Miller raised the crucifix and demanded, "In the name of the Lord Almighty, tell me, what is your name?" David only chuckled, a deep rasping sound. Again the priest thundered, "Your name, servant of Satan." He sprinkled holy water across David's face. David shrieked, contorting, then spat out words between curses. "You think me a fool? You want my name so you can drive me out, cast me from this world? Never." Then he laughed, a sound no longer human. The thing inside him had spoken. Father Miller's face hardened. He lowered the crucifix and gave the order in a low, steady voice, "Take him to the church." The 2 young men obeyed without hesitation. They hefted David onto their shoulders as he thrashed and shrieked, spitting curses into the night. From the corner of the house, a shadow lingered. Johnson stood watching as his son was carried away, as though abducted. But there was no fear in him, no fatherly panic. Instead, he felt only relief, a lightness, as though chains had fallen from his soul. At the parish church, they sat David in a wooden chair, his feet planted inside a strange sigil drawn upon the floorboards. His eyes bulged, rolling with fury, his mouth spewing endless blasphemies. Father Thomas Miller sprinkled holy water across his face, chanting scripture with unyielding force. Each word drove David into spasms. He writhed and screamed, his body twisting as if the verses themselves were burning him alive. At last his head sagged. His voice broke. "Enough, enough, I will speak." The priest seized the moment. "Then tell me, what is your name?" David shrieked. "Envy. I am Envy." He burst into wild, crackling laughter. Father Miller's expression hardened, though satisfaction flickered in his eyes. He raised the crucifix high. "Very well, Envy. Then in the name of the Lord Almighty, I cast you back into hell where you belong." The priest thundered the name, the walls echoing with it. David writhed one last time, then collapsed, limp and unconscious. For a moment the air seemed to clear, as though something foul had finally fled. Father Miller knelt, lifted the blindfold, and pried open David's eyelids. His gaze was once again human. "The demon is gone," the priest declared. "It found its way in through jealousy, through the sin of envy. I have faced it only once before in my lifetime. It is cunning and growing stronger." He exhaled heavily, weary but resolute, and ordered that David be returned home quietly. By morning, David appeared renewed. He dressed in bright, fashionable clothes, his face glowing with an easy cheer. He spoke to Johnson with a boyish joy that had been missing for so long. "Father, it feels like I've woken from a nightmare. These past days were terrible, but now I feel free." Johnson nodded, smiling faintly. He said nothing, though inside his heart swelled with relief. If not for Father Miller, who knew what horrors would have befallen his son? When David left for work, Johnson wandered down to the garage. David had taken the silver car, leaving behind the black one he had driven the past 2 days. That was fine. Johnson often preferred the black car. Today, he meant to drive to the church, to thank Father Miller in person, and to offer a donation. But the moment he opened the door, a stench hit him. Rot, iron, decay. Choking, Johnson searched for the source. His trembling hands lifted the trunk, and there she was, a girl, her skin bruised purple, her body swelling with decomposition. Flies crawled across her flesh, buzzing hungrily. Johnson staggered back, gagging. His mind reeled. David, it was David who had done this. That was why he had smiled so brightly yesterday morning, the joy of a man who had fed his hunger. On the body lay a crumpled note scrawled in furious hand. "Whore, parasite, living off beauty to scheme behind my back. You deserve to die." Johnson's stomach turned cold. Jealousy, always jealousy, the demon had whispered, and David had listened. But in his heart, Johnson refused to blame his son. No, this was envy's work. David was its puppet. His boy was not guilty, only enslaved. And so grimly, Johnson decided to hide the body, the garden, the flower beds. No one would ever think to look beneath roses. He dragged the corpse, wrapped in a sack doused with perfume to mask the stench, and began to dig. The earth was soft, almost too soft, especially at the mound where the roses had grown taller overnight. His shovel struck something not stone, not root, soft yet firm, flesh. Johnson clawed the dirt away. His heart froze. Another body, another young woman. A note pinned to her chest bore the same words of hatred, the same twisted scrawl. "Whore, parasite, you deserve to die." Johnson collapsed to his knees. David, his son, one victim for each day, each rose blooming unnaturally above their shallow graves. Gritting his teeth, Johnson reburied the second corpse and hid the first beside it, arranging the flowers as if nothing had ever been disturbed. Then he washed the car, scrubbing away blood and rot until no trace remained. Later at the church, Johnson presented his donation. Father Miller thanked him warmly, but his face remained grave. "The demon of envy is sly. I fear it has not abandoned your son so easily. Watch him closely. Report to me at once if you see the signs again." Johnson nodded, masking his dread. That evening, David returned early, whistling, humming with cheer. He wore the smile of a dutiful son and insisted on cooking dinner. "Father," he said, "look, I made steak tonight, for you." Johnson entered with groceries in hand, startled by the unusual gesture. "My boy, what's the occasion? A victory at work?" David only smiled, setting the food before him. Johnson sat, chewing slowly. The steak was rare, the juices running red. But tonight the blood tasted wrong, sour, coppery, foul. David spoke between bites, casual, almost playful. "I'm happy, Father, happier than I've been in years. Today I rid myself of a meddler, someone who stuck his nose where it didn't belong. He got what he deserved." His grin widened, his eyes gleamed. Johnson's fork slipped from his hand. A chill spread through him. The meat in his mouth was no longer meat, it was blood. He swallowed hard, forced down the bile rising in his throat, and drank deeply from his glass. Across the table, David laughed softly, humming to himself as though nothing in the world were wrong. But Johnson knew. His gut screamed the truth. The demon was not gone. Not yet. Johnson didn't go to the living room that night. No television, no nightly routine. Instead, he waited, listening for David's footsteps, waiting until he was sure his son had returned to his room. Only then did he slip quietly down to the garage. The silver car David had taken to work stood there in the dark. A thought gnawed at Johnson's mind. What if David had killed again? What if the demon envy had never truly left? His hands trembled as he lifted the trunk lid. What he saw made him stagger backward, choking on bile. Inside lay a body he knew all too well. The priest, Father Thomas Miller. His eyes stared wide, frozen in terror. A cord dug deep into his bruised neck, and his lips were the color of ash. In his rigid hand, he still clutched a Bible. Pinned to his chest was a note scrawled in jagged handwriting, "The price for meddling. You deserve to die." Johnson's legs nearly gave way. Had David discovered that it was him who'd gone to the priest for help? Was tonight's cheerful dinner conversation nothing more than a cruel test, a way to probe his father's guilt? The air seemed to freeze around him. Johnson stood paralyzed, staring down at Father Miller's corpse, until a voice cut through the silence. "Dad? What are you doing down there?" Johnson's heart lurched. He slammed the trunk shut as quietly as he could and forced his shaking legs to carry him out of the garage. At the door, David was waiting, smiling. "Oh," Johnson stammered, his throat dry. "It's nothing, just checking for rats, nasty little things." David's smile widened, his voice soft but dripping with meaning. "Yes, rats, always scurrying, hiding in the dark. They deserve to die, don't they? But sometimes they're too clever, too quick to catch, or too useful to kill." He brushed past his father casually, vanishing back into the house. But before disappearing entirely, he turned, meeting Johnson's eyes with that same unsettling grin. "It's late, Dad. Cold outside. You should get some rest before you make yourself sick." Johnson forced a thin smile in return, but when the door shut behind David, sweat poured from his forehead. His body trembled violently. He knew he had only one choice left. The next morning, Johnson left a note with breakfast. "I have urgent business. Eat and head to work early." When David found it, he only chuckled. By then, Johnson's car was already miles away, rolling down a dirt road toward a secluded wooden house marked by charms, peachwood branches, mulberry twigs, a glaring 8-trigram mirror over the door. A voice called from inside, "Who's there?" Johnson answered, "It's me." "Johnson." A pause, then confusion. "Johnson who?" He could hardly blame the old man for not remembering. It had been more than 20 years since Johnson left this place, and with it, the Taoist path. He had turned to Christianity instead, abandoning his former teacher. But now, with the church shattered and the priest murdered, the only hope left was the master he had once betrayed. Inside sat an old man with a mane of white hair and a beard to match, sipping strong tea in his nightclothes. His name was Edward, once famed across the region for his mastery of Taoist rites. Johnson bowed deeply. "Master, it's me, Johnson, from years ago." Edward squinted, then slapped his forehead with mock revelation. "Ah, the fool, the cursed brat. I thought you'd be dead by now." Shame burned through Johnson, but he pressed on. He begged forgiveness, bowed again and again, until Edward finally narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "You're not here out of repentance. You're here because you want something." Johnson admitted it. His son was possessed. He needed help. Edward stroked his beard. "We're no longer master and disciple. You'll need to show sincerity." Johnson hurried to produce a thick envelope of cash. Edward weighed it in his hand, then nodded. "Very well, tonight." At midnight, Johnson left every door unlocked and waited in silence. A shadow slipped through the threshold, Edward in his yellow Taoist robes. Swift and silent, he crept to David's room. Then, with a burst of speed, he leapt onto the bed, slapped a talisman onto David's face, and chanted, "By heaven's order, depart, foul spirit." David writhed and howled, then fell still. Edward burned the talisman, mixed the ashes with water, and forced it down David's throat. He checked with his mirror, then declared with satisfaction, "The demon is gone." But as he turned to leave, David shot upright, eyes black as pitch, and seized Edward's arm with monstrous strength. "Your God is not my God," David roared. With a single wrench, he tore Edward's arm from its socket. The old man screamed, blood streaming down his face, his body racked with agony. David's grin split wide, teeth jagged and gleaming. "Your God is not my God. You cannot banish me." Edward stumbled backward, clutching the stump of his arm, shrieking, "This is no ordinary demon. What are you?" He fled into the night, leaving his severed arm behind. Through a crack in the door, Johnson had seen it all. His son turned toward him, footsteps echoing as he approached. "Dad?" David's voice was calm now, almost playful. "Are you awake?" Johnson froze, holding his breath, praying silence might save him. "I know you're awake," David whispered. "I know you saw everything, and I know you've been plotting behind my back. Do you want to know why I let you meddle? Because you've been useful. You've buried my secrets, but perhaps you've gone too far." The words broke Johnson's mind. His heart thundered, blood bursting in his veins until his vision swam red. When David finally opened the door, he found his father collapsed, eyes bulging, lifeless. David knelt beside the corpse and laughed softly. "Oh, Father, I wasn't ready for you to die. I had so much to tell you." That night, flames engulfed the house. Neighbors later swore they saw a man drive away in a black car, brimmed hat shadowing eyes as dark as coal. In the weeks that followed, newspapers whispered of a killer who left notes with each corpse, condemning his victims for their sins. Some said it was not a man at all, but a demon called envy. And if envy had escaped, who was to say its brothers would not follow? After all, as David had said with that terrible smile, "Your God is not my God." And that's where tonight's tale ends. Tell me, what do you think? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Don't Sleep is listening. If the story sent chills down your spine, don't forget to like and share this video with your friends. And make sure you subscribe to Don't Sleep right now, so you'll be the first to hear the next story creeping out of the dark. Thank you for watching, if you're still awake.